Have you with us? Thankful for your presence. We're just tickled to death that you are here, and we have several visitors in our midst. We're thankful for each of you being here as well, and look forward to meeting you if you have not yet been met by us. In just a few moments, Brother Heath Rosenblum will lead us in a song, and Brother Bubba Webster will lead us in a prayer. And then our guest speaker for the evening will take up the rest of that time. We are grateful, I'm especially grateful, to introduce our speaker tonight, Jack Orbison. Some family connection, I'll let y'all work that out, who lives in New Summerfield, Texas, for the last, how many years? 23 years. He has been preaching since at least 1952, my brother and I discussed. Not sure exactly of that date. He could tell us, but we didn't ask him. He's got 5 children that we know of, 13 grandchildren that we know of, 18 great-grandchildren that we know of, and that's a pretty good group to keep up with all the time. My guess is that our speaker tonight is coming real close to setting the mark for the most number of years speaking that has spoken on our summer lectureship series, and perhaps the oldest speaker speaking on our lectureship, at least in a long time, in addition to having traveled the farthest distance to come and speak. So several records right there. He preaches every Sunday for the church in Cushing, Texas, and the church in Reclaw, Texas. He is one of several participants on a weekly television program entitled Give Me the Bible that has been going on for some 15 plus years. And we are very glad to have our speaker tonight here. And of course, you have to be a little proud with me of having my dad here. And we're kin to Dolly Gargis, so that makes us family, and that's a good thing. He'll be speaking tonight on Gideon, Seeking a Man of Valor. Take your songbooks, join with us as we sing, then as we go to God in prayer, and then we'll enjoy the discussion from Brother Jack Orbison in just a moment. Heath?
883, number 883. Sing the first and last verses. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, singing Alleluia, Alleluia. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Alleluia, Alleluia. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Alleluia, Alleluia. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Alleluia, Alleluia.
Bow with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time we have to come together. We thank you for each one here that makes up this church. We ask your blessings upon each one, and we're thankful for each one. We ask that you be with us as we go through the study here, and that we give attention to Mr. Orbison, and we pray that he has good recollection of the things he studied. We thank you for him and his service, and we ask that you be with him and you be with us as we go. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here. We welcome each and every one of you. We commend you for your spiritual interest in being here this evening. And the special thanks I want to give to the elders and to Tim for the invitation to come. You know that I've been here before, and I've always been treated kindly and very friendly and very warm, very thoughtful, and it's always a pleasure to get to come to Maysville. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. Also, it's an opportunity to visit with Tim and Libby and the family. We always appreciate that opportunity as well. To be here. My subject this evening is to be an Old Testament character of Gideon. You know, when we study about Gideon, we see that he's a man of valor, a man of courage, a man of great strength. That we can find many lessons in our study of Gideon. You know, it's not just an Old Testament story that we're studying about. It's not just history that we're looking at and interested in. Even though it is history, it's very true. It's not a fable. It's not a parable. It's a true story that we read about, but it is one that teaches us lessons that we might have the opportunity to learn, to be strengthened. As we go back and read these stories, there's a meaning. You know, these things were given for a purpose. You know, there's many things that happen that are not recorded. But these are recorded that we have, and they're there for a reason, a purpose. And the purpose is that we might learn more about God, that it might give us greater faith and greater strength. As a matter of fact, the Apostle Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 15 in verse 4, when he says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning." But he goes on, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. So here we can see that Paul is saying these things were written, they were preserved for our learning. That's the reason they're there. So we need to study them and find out what lessons are available and gain whatever strength we can from our study together. And so we can find that this makes it possible for us to grow in patience and in strength, and also that we might have hope. You know, they expect that good things are going to happen if we live the Christian life. And we can gain this as we see how God has dealt with his people. And even those that they made their mistakes, but then whenever they got right with God, then God got right with them and gave them many, many blessings. And we can have that as well. Let's go back and look, though, at our lesson this evening. The scriptures we'll be studying will be found in Judges chapter 6 and 7. That we'll not spend a great deal of time reading from those, but occasionally we'll refer to that. And we notice some background information that we need to have. And first of all, we can see that we have the children of Israel at this particular time are ruled by or guided by judges. It was prior to the kings. And so we find that they had men and a few women that were to rule over the people at that time. It was kind of a roller coaster situation, and up and down, that God's people would be blessed richly for a period of time, and then they would become careless and live a life of sin and turn away from the Lord. And then whenever the Lord found them in that condition, he would bring hardships upon them, punishment upon them, and then they would be called upon, or they would be calling upon God, and he would send them a judge. And that's the case that we have concerning the situation tonight. At the time of Gideon, that we see that Israel was one that had turned away again, that they had turned away from the Lord. They had drifted a long way. And it seems that they did this rather quickly whenever they would be turned away from God, things that they knew better, but it was not what they really wanted to do. And I think probably that's the case of even sin today. You know, I think the world is filled with sin, not so much because of ignorance. No doubt there's plenty of ignorance, but also because of desire. That's just what they want to do, and that's what they're trying to do. And because of this, that they are going to suffer the consequences in this. We notice at this particular time, the nation of Israel was oppressed. The Moabites and Amalekites have their enemies that were across the Jordan River, that they had been running loose, we might say, for the last 7 years. That seemed like a long period of time. They had greater periods of time of persecution, but for 7 years that they had control over these people, and they could do whatever they wanted to do with them because they had the numbers on them. They overruled them. We'll notice that it tells us in the verse 1 of chapter 6, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Midian 7 years. So he says that they had been doing evil, and because of this, the Midianites had come upon them for 7 years. You know, they would come into Israel, and when they came, well, they came with a crowd. They'd bring their camels and their donkeys and their livestock, and they would take whatever they wanted. You know, Israel was their enemy, and they had the numbers over them, the power over them, and they would just take whatever they wanted. They would take their crops, they would take their possessions, take their animals, they'd take whatever they wanted, and what they didn't take, they'd destroy. You know, they would allow their animals to graze on their crops and whatever. And so we could see that this was a very difficult situation, that they would just take whatever. In verse 2 of chapter 6, it says, and the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them dens, which are in the mountains, and the caves and the strongholds. Israel was just hiding out, hiding in the caves, hiding in the hills. They were afraid of these people because they came upon them in such large numbers. In verse 5, it talks about the numbers of them. It says, for they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. So they came upon them as grasshoppers. Now that doesn't mean they were little. On another occasion, Israel had sent some spies over into the land of Canaan, and they came back and said, we can't take the land because we're like grasshoppers. In other words, they're like giants and we're like grasshoppers. But that's not the way the grasshoppers are used here. The number is the thing that he's talking about here. That like a swarm of locusts. You know, probably you have seen times when you've been infested by grasshoppers. And that we've had a number of those over our way. Some of the years they get so bad, I even heard that they were eating the peaches and leaving the seed hanging on the tree. The grasshoppers were so numerous, they were just eating and taking everything. But this was just a figure of speech, that they came as grasshoppers. In other words, that they were so many, just like a swarm of locusts when they came upon them. You know, we might ask the question, why did God let this happen to his people? Why did he let these enemies come in and just do these things to these people, and for such an extended period of time? For 7 years that they were able to do these things. And of course the answer to that is that this was not an accident, that God allowed this to happen that his people might be punished so they could be awakened. You know, he tells us that the Lord chastened those that he loves, that he loved his people. They were going astray. They needed to be reminded they were going astray, and so this was one of the ways that he would do this. They knew better than what they were doing. You know, they were beginning to worship like the people round about them worshiped. They liked it. It was entertaining, that it was pleasurable to them, and so they were doing what the other people were doing. And of course, the Lord was not pleased with this. They knew better. They'd been instructed concerning this exactly in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 4. He said that thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. In other words, don't make any idols. Don't make any images. You know, this is something that was not to be done at all under any circumstance. We need to learn the lesson. These things are the works of men, and of course the works of men are going to perish in the fall. They have no strength, they have no power, whatever. But even Gideon's father, no doubt, was involved in idolatry, because we find in the story in verse 25 that there was an idol and an image on his property. So this was the city idol. They had an altar, they had an idol, they had an image of Baal, and so this was something that they had. So even his own father was guilty of this. We notice that after this 7 years, Israel was so troubled that they began to cry out to the Lord. You know, whenever things get bad, when things go good, you might not be thinking about the Lord, but when things go bad, then you're going to begin to think about the Lord. And this is the way these people did. And we can see they began to cry for help. In verse 6, he said, and Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. So they began to cry out unto the Lord. They were looking for some relief. That was the purpose. That was the reason God allowed his enemies to come in and to punish them and to take whatever they did, was because he wanted his people to wake up so that they could have something better than what they had at this time. The Lord didn't let them be punished just to be punished, but he gave them instructions concerning what they were doing. Numerous times in the Old Testament, we see where God sent prophets to his people. The reason he sent the prophets were more than onefold, but one of the main reasons was to warn the people of what they were doing wrong and what they were going to suffer as a result of this, and why they were suffering what they were, and what the answer was, how they were to correct this. So we find that there was a prophet sent to Israel during these periods of time, beginning there in verse 8. And the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which said unto them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the house of bondage. And I delivered you out of the hands of the Egyptians, out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out before you, and gave you their land. So the prophet reminded them of why they were being persecuted and what the Lord had done for them, and of all the good things that he had done, and the good things that he liked to do and wanted to do to them. So we can see how much the Lord loved these people, and he wanted them to know what was going on. He still wants his people to know. You know, the Apostle Paul many times to the brethren said, I would not have you ignorant. In other words, I want you to know. And the Lord wants us to know. He doesn't want us to be ignorant in this way. We notice that Israel still had left God, and they had turned unto idols. In Judges chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, he said, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their land. So we can see that he promised and reminded them of the things that he had done for them. Now then, we know that the Lord is ready to help his people, because they have begun to cry out unto him. And whenever they have a problem, whenever they have a need, they cry unto the Lord. The Lord is there to bless. The Lord is there to forgive in whatever. Now then, he's going to choose again another leader that will help them and lead them out of bondage, to get them back on the right track again. And Gideon is the one that's going to be selected or called. It tells us where Gideon lived, that he lived in Ophrah, a place there in Ephraim or Benjamin, or in this area that we we see that he lived in this little city. And we notice that an angel of the Lord appeared unto him. It tells us that he came and sat under an oak tree. That Gideon was there. Gideon was hiding. He says that he was hiding there in a place in a wine press. That no doubt the reason he was hiding was because this is what they all did. They had caves and strongholds and hills, and they had to go hide because of the Midianites and what they would do to them. So he was just threshing a little wheat and hiding from those people that would take it if they found him in whatever. But then the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. He's going to be the new judge, and he's going to be the valiant man that's going to lead them out of their bondage. So Gideon was assured by the angel of the Lord. In verse 12, he says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor." The Lord is with you. You are a mighty man. Gideon didn't feel like a mighty man, but the Lord knew what he had, knew what his heart was like. You know, the Lord knows what our heart is like. He knows who we are and knows what we are, and he knows what we're thinking. So we can see the Lord knows. And so it's not as if that he doesn't know what's going on. He called him a man of courage. Evidently, Gideon didn't feel very courageous at this time. But it turns out that he was a man of courage, that he had the courage to do what the Lord would have him to do. And eventually, as we continue the story, we'll notice this to be the case. But now then, Gideon also is a very truthful man, a very honest man. And so he just comes right out with what he's thinking. And he said, if that's true, you know, if the Lord is aware of our situation, if he can use me to do anything, then why are we suffering? As we look there to verse 13, and Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers did, and our fathers sold us off, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. So he just asked the question, what was on his heart? You know, if I'm going to be able to lead these people out, if you consider me a man of valor, and the Lord is aware of what's going on, he's going to help us do this, then why is this going on in the first place? Why are we suffering? You know, he said, I've heard lots of wonderful stories. You know, they told their children and their children's children that concerning the years that they had spent back in Egypt when they were in bondage, some 400 years, and how that the Lord had delivered them out of that bondage. There was raised up a prophet among them, which was Moses, and to lead these people out. And no doubt he had heard the story of the victory and how that the Lord actually delivered them from Egypt. You know, they sent Moses down, and Moses was courageous. He went before Pharaoh and he demanded that he let the people go, and you're familiar with the story. How that, you know, they had the plagues, and it would come upon Pharaoh, and he would still not consent and have another plague that come upon them. Finally, the last plague that came upon them was the Passover. And every Jewish child had been taught concerning the Passover, and they were taught how to worship and to keep and observe the Passover. So now then, Gideon no doubt had heard these as well, and he wants to know, well, if the Lord really has the power and he's going to help us and whatever, then why isn't he? Why are we in the fix that we're in at this point? We find also as the children of Israel were brought out of the Egyptian bondage, that they came to the sea of the Red Sea, and it posed a problem, but not a problem when God was with them, because they parted the water, they could walk across and whatever. So we see that this is what Gideon's talking about, the things that God had done with his people in the past. When God was with them, this is what was taking place. When they went into the desert, that he provided them food miraculously. You know, we probably don't ever stop to think so much about how much food it would take to feed the number of people that were gathered together in that outing. You know, that we don't really know exactly over 600,000 men of fighting or soldier age, and then the women and the children and the old and the young. You put all those together, we can come up with a guesstimate somewhere in the millions, maybe 1 million, maybe 3 million. We really don't know. But whatever it is, just take the smallest, probably 1 million. It was knowing that we had 600,000 soldiers, and you see how much it takes to give them all a cup of water a day, or how much it would take to give them just a loaf of bread a day, and right down the line. Well, the Lord fed all these people miraculously with the manna, and it just fell. They didn't have time to plant, they didn't have time to harvest, but the Lord took care of them miraculously. This is the story that Gideon knew about, and whatever. We notice that he provided him the water, even the fire serpents. Later when they began to murmur and complain, and the Lord let the poisonous snakes come among them, and how that he was able to make it possible for them to survive the poisonous snakes by putting the bronze snake or serpent in the midst of the camp. If you'd look upon it, then you could be spared. So we can see that the angel charged Gideon to be strong. Do what the Lord tells you to do. Verse 14, and the Lord looked upon him and said, go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? He says, be strong, be courageous, do what the Lord said, and you'll be victorious. I think that that's a good thing for us to remember. If we'll just be strong and we'll do what the Lord says and be faithful, then we too will succeed. That the Lord can't use the people that are afraid. We notice that Gideon was not afraid. He had already showed courage. Later on, we'll notice how he made sure of the things that transpired. He wanted to be sure that he was right in whatever, but he was not afraid. In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8, it tells us there, or gives us there in that verse, several sins that are named specifically. And it may be interesting to note that the very first one on the list was the fearful. The fearful. Whenever you think about all the sins that a man might commit, he's fearful, afraid to do what the Lord said to do. You don't have the courage to stand up for that which is right, but that's what Gideon was able to do. But Gideon wanted to be sure. He wanted to be sure that he wasn't making any mistake whatsoever, and we appreciate Gideon for this. As a matter of fact, we ought to be sure. We ought not to be ready to just swallow anything that comes along, anything that somebody might decide to do, but we need to be sure that we're doing the right thing. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, he reminds us that we ought to try the spirits. Try the spirits. In other words, prove them, test them, find out if it's true. If somebody says this is what the Lord teaches, prove it. That's really what he's talking about there. So we need to be sure that we put it to the test. Gideon was doing just that, with this angel of the Lord, that he was putting him to the test. And he told him that he wanted a sign, but first of all, he said, will you wait while I go fix something to eat? That this was something they did, that they always, they were very hospitable in those days, and a stranger would come by, that they would take care of them. They'd feed them, put them up for the night, or whatever. So Gideon asked him if he'd wait. You stop to think about it. We do everything in such a hurry today. But, whenever a stranger came and he had to go kill a goat, in this case, if it was a goat, he had to kill the goat, dress him, cook him, and then make some bread, and then put the whole thing together. And so he came out, and he had the goat that he had prepared, and he had the bread that he had cooked, and he had the broth that he made. That tells us the method of cooking the goat, that he had boiled him. Now he told him to put the meat on a rock, pour the broth over it, and then the angel of the Lord put his staff to it and consumed it. The fire just came and consumed it. He wanted to have proof. He wanted a sign. The Lord gave him a sign. He was willing to be patient and wait for him, and then to show him that he had this power. Now then he tells him that he ought to go and to pull down the altar of Baal. This is the assignment that he told him that he ought to do, that he ought to go get his father's oxen, tear down that altar that had been erected to Baal, tear down the image that was there. And so he does just this. It tells us in verse 27, then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him, and so it was. And because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, he could not do it by day, but he did it by night. Gideon not only is courageous to do what the Lord said, but he uses common sense. You know, that it didn't make sense to do that in the daylight, that it did make sense to do that at night. And the size of the job, the very fact that it took 10 men and them to tear down that altar, taking their oxen and whatever, so it probably was quite a large structure that they had erected there. And so he was told that he ought to pull it down and tear it up and whatever, and then to kill one of the bulls of his father and to offer it as a sacrifice. Gideon proceeded to do just that. He had the courage. He was willing to do what the angel of the Lord told him that he ought to do. But now then, come morning, you can understand what the problem was, that the people were very upset, so much so that they wanted to kill whoever did it, and they no doubt knew who did it. Now then, they're going to kill him, that he ought to be killed, anybody that would do such thing. So we see that Gideon's father makes a stand, and he says that any man is trying to defend Baal, let him be put to death. Said, you know, that if he is a god after all, that he doesn't need man to defend him or to take his side of the case. He doesn't need man if he's a god. You know, that's one of the things we know about an idol. And of course, an idol is that it can't speak. You know, sometimes the scriptures refer to them as dumb idols. Well, that's really what he's talking about. You know, that they can't speak, that they can't say anything. And no idol ever spoke to any man. And so we can see that that's one of the things about an idol, that the idol wasn't able to move. If it moved, somebody had to move it. You know, that back in the days whenever the ark was captured by the Philistines, they brought it in, they put it in the temple with Dagon. And the next morning, Dagon was lying on his face in the floor. You know, they had to pick him up. Dagon didn't get up of his own power. He couldn't do anything. They had to pick him up. That's the way idols were. And that's the way idols are. They don't have any strength. They don't have any power. And Joash, that the father of Gideon, he was correct in saying, you know, that if he has a grief, let him defend himself. He doesn't need man, and if any man's do that, that he too should be killed. Verses 31 and 32. So we see that Gideon now is referred to as the one who contended with Baal in whatever. But that brings us to a major invasion by the Midianites, and the story that we often remember about Gideon. Well, notice that they came into the valley there in verse 33, and Gideon sounded a trumpet, and he gathered together his brethren, his kinsmen, and then he also gathered together an army from Manasseh and Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali, the regions, the tribes around him, that he went out and called them. The sounding the trumpet simply means that he sent out the call to these people and gathered together a crowd. So we notice that he gathered together a sizable army, but before he moves with that army, he wants to be sure. And so, again, that he calls upon the Lord to give him a sign. I think we can learn in this the patience of the Lord, you know, the long suffering of the Lord. That here Gideon he'd already had some tests and some trials, some signs and whatever, and now then he's still wanting to have some more, just to be sure. And so he says if I put out a piece of fleece, let the dew fall on the fleece, let it be dry over all the rest of the land. And he did, and it was that way. He still wanted to be sure, and he said, reverse the process. Let it be dry on the fleece and wet all the way around. And again, he did that as well. Verses 36 and 38, we find this to be the case. Then we see that he gathered his men at a place, of course, the Midianites came into the valley of Jezreel, the Esdraelon, and the plain of the valley there. And they had an army of people there. And again, there's too many of those people to even count. But now then Gideon has his army, and he's gathered at the edge of the valley on the other side of this. In chapter 7 and verse 1, the Lord tells him that he has too many people. That no doubt this would be quite a shock. Already you're wondering, do I have enough men? That these people, there are lots of them, and they're very strong, and they've been running over them. And so we can see that he had told him he had to reduce his army. He had too many people there. He had a reason for this, that he wanted them to know that God was the one that was going to fight this battle. It wasn't himself. We need to learn that lesson. Whatever we can accomplish, it's not of our strength, but it's what God has done through us. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, whenever Paul says, that he could do all things through Christ who strengthened him. So he could be able to accomplish all of these things. We notice that the number was to be reduced, Judges chapter 7 and verse 2. Now then, he's going to let the first some of these people to go home if they are afraid. That's a good thing. You can't really use cowards in your business if they won't stand, if they won't do. And how many cowards, how many fearful did they have? He said there were 22,000 that went home. Now then, if you're the commander and you got an army, you got a big army to fight, and now then they're, reducing the size of your army, and the 22,000 are permitted to go walk away. But that was the case with Gideon. But before he can grieve too much about that, then it tells him that he still has too many. Had 10,000 men, too many. And he said that they need to be reduced again. And so he gave him another example. He took him down to the pond, the water hole, and he gave them an opportunity to drink. And those that would get down and drink out of the pond, they were sent home. Those that would take their hand and would lap like a dog, while they might keep their eye on the enemy, that they were the ones that stayed. And of course there were 300 of those men that were able to stay. And so now then Gideon has 300 men, and he has to go into battle against these Amalekites. Gideon is given another encouragement, another sign actually, that the Lord tells him that if he's concerned, just to go down to where these Midianites were encamped and find out what was going on. And so he went down, and as he was standing there, that he heard one soldier of the Midianites talking to another soldier, and the guy is telling this fellow soldier that he had a dream. And in his dream said that there was a loaf of bread that came tumbling down out of the mountain, hit the tent, knocked the tent flat, whatever, verses 13 and 14. And then the other soldier is able to interpret that dream for him, and he said that what that really means is Gideon's going to be victorious. Gideon and his army, so obviously they were aware that Gideon had an army, and now then he said that's just going to be Gideon, and that's what he's telling us here. Now that encouraged Gideon to know that now then that this soldier was saying that he had had a dream, and the other soldier says the dream says that Gideon's going to win, and so now then Gideon is encouraged. How does he show his appreciation? Verse 15 says he worshiped the Lord. That's the way we show the Lord our appreciation, is to worship him. And the way we show our appreciation is to worship him according to his instructions, the way that he would want us to do this. You know, Peter tells us that we have a reason for our hope, and that we ought to be ready to give an answer to any man that asks us a reason concerning our hope. So we can see how important it is for us to have hope. And our hope is not just an emotion. It's not just a feeling, you know, sometimes we just use it as a doubt, like I hope so. But this is assurance, that we have a reason to believe that it's going to take place, and we can have encouragement concerning this. We notice that God then delivered the enemy into Gideon's hand. Gideon has 300 men. They are armed with a pitcher, a torch or a light, and a trumpet. That's all they have. Not a sword among them, but they have this, and they have 300 men. And we'll notice that they were to take these, according to verse 16 of chapter 7. They were to take their trumpet in their right hand, and they would take the pitcher and put it over the torch or over the light, and then they were to put these men around the entire army. When you put the pitcher over the light, then the light wouldn't shine. Light goes in straight lines, and it would only go straight down with the pitcher over the torch. And so they had their pitcher, they had the torch, and they had their trumpets. And Gideon had placed these in 3 different groups of 100 in each, in key spots around these people. And then whenever the time came, Gideon said, "You wait until I give the sign." When the sign came, they were told that they should break the lamp and let their lights be seen, and then to shout, Gideon and the sword of the Lord, and sword of Gideon and of the Lord. So we can see that now then these people, in the middle of the night, they get awakened, they look around and hear all this shouting, hear all these trumpets, they see all these lights, and they can just imagine, that they're overrun with people. And then with the blessing of the Lord, that they're confused, and they begin to kill each other in the dark, and then they run. And finally, Gideon was able to overcome. And we won't have any time to go into the rest of the story, but he's victorious in all that he had. But we see that Gideon was a man of courage. He was a man of strength. He did what the Lord would have him to do, and the Lord blessed them. That Israel then had many years of prosperity and peace because they had done what the Lord said. But there's some lessons I think that we might look at as we think about these. First of all, I think we can learn the lesson of the power of God. But for reading this Old Testament story, that we see that God has shown he had great power, all kind of power, that he was able to consume the offering that was given. He was able to defeat a large army with just a few men. God's power was able to do that. I think that we can learn also how important faith is. That it's very important that we have faith. Hebrews 11:6 says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him." And we notice that if Gideon hadn't had his faith, he could not have succeeded. We need to have faith, that we believe what the Lord said, that he's going to do what he says. And of course, our belief, again, is not just an emotion, but it's something that we gain from hearing God's word. That's what he says, Romans chapter 10, verse 17. He tells us that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. We also learn that God will punish those that are disobedient, that he doesn't do this to be evil, but he does this to bring them to repentance. So we can see how important it is. We also learn that idols have no power. Why would you want to turn to idolatry? It has no power. And anything that we put before God is our idol. We may not build an altar, we may not engrave or mold an image, but if we put anything before God, that's our idol. And our idol has no more power than did those idols. That if we make our jobs or whatever. So we can learn these lessons. In just a moment, we'll conclude with the invitation. Thank you very much.